How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak.
Hello there. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to How I Got Here. Now, many of you will realise that it's been a couple of weeks. It's actually been about 10 weeks since we had an episode of How I Got Here. Season 1 ended with rather obvious timing in the first week of March, just as everything was kind of falling around by everyone's feet. So we thought it was around that time it was worth taking a break for a little while we did more important things, and all the people that we wanted to interview were busy fighting the fires and figuring out how they were going to get through the coronavirus outbreak. That was the beginning of March, and we're starting to record new episodes for season 2 of How I Got Here. For those that don't know, How I Got Here is a regular weekly podcast from Mozio and PhocusWire, looking at the backstory and innovation and startups in travel and transportation. So that's our backstory. We're good to be back. We're glad to be back. And our very first guest for what will be episode 29 is someone who's very well known to many of you. His name is Rod Cuthbert. He is the co-founder, the former chairman and CEO of Viator, which is the tours and activities platform that was, I guess, born in Australia, but was eventually sold to Tripadvisor in 2014. He actually left the company in 2010 in that executive role to create Rome to Rio, which was a door-to-door travel search engine. He left there in 2018 ahead of its eventual sale to Go Euro. He's now a non-exec director for another activities platform, which is Veltra. He's an investor in brands such as Magpie, and is a frequent critic of startups that pass through the battleground and summit stages at Focuswire. Many of you that have attended Web in Travel and the Focuswire conference over the years will know that Rob is a very vocal critic, but also praiser, I think, of startups in the travel industry. So first of all, a very warm welcome to you, Rod. Thank you for joining us on How I Got Here.
Kevin and David, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Okay, right. As is tradition, and this tradition will stick with in season 2, is that we always ask our guests a very, very simple question, and we ask you to respond in as succinctly as we know that you can, Rod. And that's kind of, tell us briefly, how did you get here? And you can be as flamboyant or as factual as you like, but tell us how you got here to this day, Rod.
I think the most succinct way would be to say through a series of fortunate events. I was very, very lucky that I was in the right place at the right time, met the right people, and the ball just broke the right way for me on a couple of different occasions, and it wasn't certainly because of any particular good planning or amazing foresight or tremendous technology or anything like that. I was simply a lucky guy.
Right, but okay, well, you've left the kind of the carrot hanging there in front of us to start kind of getting at you with then. So yes, lucky, very fortunate, but if we go right back to the formation of Viator, alongside being lucky, what were you doing at that time to allow you to create something that you eventually sold for $200 million to Tripadvisor? You must have had something more than good fortune.
Right. Yeah, it was the good fortune that got us started, I guess. With a friend of mine, Peter Fox, we started a company to build websites for people. And we didn't have a particular view on what type of websites or what sort of people, but we won a particular customer. It was a travel company. It was one of the Travel Corporation Group, Creative Holidays, and they told their sister companies, Trafalgar, Insight, one or two others, and we had a bunch of different companies that we were building and managing websites for. So we managed to build a good portfolio of travel clients, and we said, why don't we specialize? Because travel is deep. It's a great thing to sell on the internet because you don't have physical goods that have to be delivered. It just seems a terrific match. And we noticed that there was money going into online travel businesses in the United States and in Europe, and we thought, well, that's possibly a good thing too. So let's really focus on this travel space.
Were you anticipating it being, you said it was a cross industries, but was that a fairly quick process from when you launched it to when you realized that, okay, let's just focus on the travel part of this?
Yeah, it was literally a couple of weeks. From mid-August when we started, I think by mid-September, we'd transitioned from being a web development company to a web development company for travel companies, for the travel industry. We decided to specialize that quickly. I mean, travel is a really deep space, so we saw, hey, there's plenty of potential here.
Okay, and last one from me for a moment then. I mean, I always forget that Peter was someone that you started it with. I mean, you're so synonymous as an individual with founding Viator. How did you meet Peter? And we'll come, as basically the follow-up question is, I think he was with you for 3 or 4 years. And how, if you could just tell us quickly, but what was the reason why he left, given that he did come on to have such great success?
Well, he was the only person that made any money out of Viator for 19 years. He sold the bulk of his shares when he left in, I guess, 97 or 98 for, I think, just under $1 million or so. And he was literally the only person that made any money besides salaries from our company until 2014. So he was pretty wise, I think. And he did well at the end as well, because he still had, a few shares left that were sold to Tripadvisor. We had met when I was working for an online travel business in Sydney, a company sort of like CompuServe. I was there for a little while. I left to join Peter to do something independently. I just, I'm not a great employee. And I figured I would probably be better as an employer.
Okay. So actually, I'm going to follow. Sorry, David. I'm just going to follow up there, because you did. That was great. Why would you say you're not a great employee?
Well, I think that I just follow my heart and my gut on things. I make decisions for reasons that sometimes I'm not even quite sure myself why I've made the decision to go in a certain direction or hire a certain person. And in a corporation, you've got to justify your decisions. As an entrepreneur, particularly, if you're the boss and you've got your own money at stake, you're not so much in that position. Once you get a lot of investors involved, you are. But in the early stages, you can plot your own course without having to, justify every move that you make. And there is a lot of decision making early on in a startup. Literally hundreds of decisions, much more than when you're in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
So, Rod, I want us to delve a little bit into some of those decisions and the process by which you started Viator. So, I don't think we've heard the full timeline yet from when you started kind of working for the travel group. I forget the ones that own Trafalgar, and then how did you make the transition from deciding you want to start Viator? What was the original insight? And I'd just love to. And I know that you guys, there was a huge amount of time between when you started it and when you actually sold it. And I think that's something a lot of entrepreneurs can potentially sympathize, especially anyone in the travel industry right now who's probably not going to be able to sell their company for a couple of years. But let's delve a little bit into that timeline.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And this is one of the lucky things that happened. We built websites for a couple of years, lots of websites, probably over 100 for various clients. And we got pretty good at that. We had good designers. We hired a guy called Jordan Digby, who built some good tech for us that allowed us to, create templates and get people up and going really quickly. And remember, this is back in the mid 90s when the tech wasn't all that flash. In fact, flash was a thing back then for a little while, if you remember. We hired a woman called Jill Hazel, who had been working at Sabre. in around 1997. And she heard through her connections, just before she left Sabre, that Sabre was putting together a project and looking for a third party who had web expertise to build them a web-based system so that travel agents could sell ground product. Essentially, what they were describing was Viator. It was a Viator for travel agents. And the idea being that Sabre, saw that their space was getting more competitive, that they would probably start to lose share to other channels, and they wanted to increase the number of products they had to sell. So an obvious one was what they called ground product, tours and activities. So Jill organised for us to pitch for that business. There was a couple of women who worked for Sabre who came down to meet with us, and I had a particular insight in one of the meetings that we had with them, and that was that these two women, they really liked Sydney. They loved it. They had come down from Dallas, Texas, which, maybe you've got some participants on the webinar here that are from Dallas, Texas. It's not a tourist destination. It is a centre of commerce. Sydney is an idyllic city, and I lived in Bondi, and we went out to dinner at Bondi Beach on a couple of evenings, and they really enjoyed it. And I said to them, look, if we win this contract and you go with us and not the company in New York or the company in London that you're talking to, I said, I think it would be good if you came down on a quarterly basis over the course of the year that it will take us to build it, to review progress. Because if we go up to you, we would only be able to afford to have one of our engineers go up. But if you come down, you can see the whole team, etc. It was a flimsy argument, but it built on the certain knowledge that I had, which was that they really, really loved the idea of being in Sydney, Australia. And we won the contract.
So take me from there to, establishing Viator.com, because that sounds like that was a Sabre contract, right? Is that correct? So that's definitely not what it ended up building.
Yeah, good catch. So we built it. It took us a year. They came and visited with us every quarter. They really enjoyed their travel. And then, lo and behold, Sabre had one of what turned out over the course of Sabre's long history, they've often had a purge where they've fired a good percentage of their staff. And around 1999, 2000, I can't remember the exact year, they fired an enormous number of people, including all of the people, bar one, I think, who had worked on our project, but certainly the vice president who had commissioned the project. So literally this product that we had built for them was left without an owner. So we had difficulty, frankly, even communicating with them about what to do, but eventually we found the new, the guy who had taken over this division, and he said, look, we have no interest in this product now, take it, it's yours. We built it for them, they paid for it, and they said, we really don't want it. It's not on our product roadmap anymore. You're welcome to go ahead and use it yourself.
Hey, just a follow-up on that one, Rod. I mean, how different do you think the landscape would have been, both for you and for tours and activities, if Sabre hadn't canned that particular project?
Well, very different. I think large corporations are not good at these sort of innovative projects. Once they had gotten their hands on it, I think they would have screwed it up. And frankly, we made the product available to travel agents, and travel agents didn't really sell much ground content.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would have been a success for them. So I think we probably would have gone on to doing something else, and hotels or cruises or some other thing, and I wouldn't be talking to you here today.
And just to get, again on that, but the way the landscape evolved, some say that Viator pretty much pioneered the kind of tours and activities booking space for consumer booking space, and that potentially would have set things back if Sabre had bought it, and then as you predicted, they may well have canned it. That may have put the whole industry, the whole sector of the industry back a couple of years. Would you say, or not?
I think, Kevin, frankly, a lot longer than that. I think as the story rolls forward and we go out and start raising funds and talking to people about investing in Viator, what we discovered was that there was just no interest in the tours and activities space. I will pick a quote from a few years forward because it's relevant right now. You know the name Rich Barton. Rich was the founding CEO, I think, at Expedia. A very, very experienced and savvy guy who talked himself when he gave presentations on Expedia's long-term goals, talked about wanting to be able to sell, a flight to Fiji, a hotel in Fiji, and surfing lessons in Fiji. So he understood that. In 2005, Barry Seidenberg and I were out raising money, and we met with Rich Barton. He was a venture partner at a venture capital company in the Bay Area. And he said, and I wrote it down in one of my notebooks because I felt it was something I wanted to remember perfectly well, his words. He said, "Is tours and activities even a thing?" And I said, "Huh?" And he said, "Is it even a big enough market?" And I said, "Rich, what do you think people do when they get there? I mean, do they go because the flight is so great or because they really love those, 20 square meter hotel rooms at the Hilton?" No, man, they go to do things. They go to the museum and to do tours and sightseeing and all that sort of stuff. And he's like, "Yeah, I know, but is it a really big market?" So, yeah, I think if we hadn't have done it, I think it would have taken a while for it to get the momentum that we created over a long period of time. We definitely didn't have. We didn't go from 0 to 100 in 7 seconds. Nothing like that.
What's interesting about your story is I feel like you guys were very early to the market, and I have a question I'd like to ask later about timing and kind of how you view that. But before we get to that question, I want to understand, kind of coming back on what Kevin said about moving the industry forward. I feel like because Sabre helped you bootstrap this almost, you guys were maybe years ahead of when a tours and activities company should have even existed. So you guys, I'm curious, I'd love to understand a little bit more about how did you drag the industry forward? I imagine there were a lot of small tours and activities providers that were not selling anything online at this point. And what amount of infrastructure did you have to build that now maybe today, Get Your Guide doesn't have to because Peak is building it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Certainly, if Sabre hadn't come up with the idea, we would not have come up with the idea. We were not talking to, sightseeing tour operators anywhere in the world. It just wasn't on our radar. We were talking to multi-day tour companies like Trafalgar and Insight and Intrepid and, all of those sorts of companies who offer those, multi-$1,000, 7 and 14-day tours.
Yeah, we interviewed Travis from Tour Radar, and that's kind of his area, right?
Yeah. And that didn't really pop for a long time either. So it was definitely Sabre that dragged us along. I guess the next, we went out, we took that product that we built for Sabre and we went out there with a B2C product and a B2B product. And we signed Rich Barton because he wanted to sell surfing in Fiji. We signed up Expedia fairly quickly. We signed Travelocity, British Airways, Lonely Planet. We signed up a lot of people, but the volumes were quite low. It was the B2C thing. Because we were early, we sort of owned SEO. We didn't have to pay for traffic at all. We just, things to do in Barcelona cost us nothing, and we were getting tons of traffic from that when the 10 blue links were there, and they really, they meant something. They were at the top of the page. So I guess, it's a good catch you've made. It's like, if it hadn't been for Sabre, we definitely didn't have the idea, but they opened the door for us.
Oh yeah, well, kind of expanding on that back to what I said about the timing earlier. I remember my first ever Focuswire. I was part of the Young Leaders, summit or whatever, and in the same class with me was Johannes from Get Your Guide, and I was brand new, and I kind of didn't really know. And I remember Get Your Guide's logo was kind of funky looking at the time, and I was like, "Who are these guys?" And now I think they're worth over $1 billion, and I think a lot about this for Mozio as well, because Mozio started 9 years ago in ground transportation, and in the last 2 to 3 years, there have been a bunch of well-funded competitors, and I almost kind of feel like I'm the Viator of the ground transportation industry at times, and that we were sometimes too early. We had we've been around for a long time, doing a lot of the hard work back before it was sexy. So, how do you think about timing, like in the recent wave of kind of tours and activities startups, both on the consumer side and also on the back end with like the Fair Harbors and Peaks, and there's been a lot of acquisitions recently?
I think the market makes sense the way it's evolved. There was a few companies that came in and tried to replicate what we were doing in the early 2000s. Isango was one out of the UK. I can't really remember. Quite a few of them failed because it was just so difficult to raise money. I think the way that the marketplace is evolving now, with a lot of different tech companies and some really well-funded retailers, it's starting to look like the market ought to look. Starting to look like what the hotel market looked like, back 15, 20 years ago. Lots of activity. I'm sure there'll be some consolidation. So yeah.
And Rod, how did you just go back again when you were coming up with the, once you decided to go it alone? Sabre had said they weren't interested in taking it forward, those kind of things. Did you have problems coming up with essentially what was a business model? Did you base it on perhaps how commissions were done in hotels or air, or did you try and come up with something completely different? And how many versions of that did you go through until you settled on something?
Well, I had no experience whatsoever as a wholesaler of travel product. None whatsoever. So we hired some people from Qantas Holidays who, principally they sold, at Qantas Holidays, they sold hotels, but they also sold a little bit of ground product, a little bit of the sort of product that we would sell. And they sold it through their travel agents and their own travel offices at the time. It was very small volume, but they did know some key suppliers, some key inbound tour operators, and they did have a good idea of the sort of commission rates and the sort of terms that were standard in the industry. And we took those as a starting point. I think one of the, I'll perhaps just branch here for a second to say that the business had this enormous jump after 9/11. The 9/11, it was a tragedy on a human scale, but for the online travel industry, it was amazing. It was like a step change, because in those weeks after 9/11, travelers in the United States and Europe to a certain extent, but certainly in the United States, they couldn't get through to their airline or their hotel on the phone, and they were forced to go onto the internet. And what they discovered on the internet was good. They discovered that they could find out whether their flight was going, or they could make a change, they could make a booking, they could get a refund, they could make a hotel reservation, they could actually look at hotel rooms, they could actually sort of be a travel agent for themselves. And there was just this massive shift away from the old way of buying travel to this new online way in a very short period of time. what that meant for us was really interesting. We were there, and people started to discover us. We started to get bookings, and we were able to take those bookings in the months after 9/11, when the travel industry was depressed. We were able to take those bookings to operators who were in a bad way because they hadn't had bookings for a little while. They had this gap because of the whole 9/11 event. And so we were like, they loved us. They absolutely adored us. And we knew how people in the travel industry paid, in the traditional travel industry, and that was slowly. Travel wholesalers and agents didn't have a reputation as being good payers. So we decided we would pay people on time, that every month on the 15th of the month, we would pay our operators, and we would pay them not only on time, but we would pay them directly into their bank account, which this is 2001, 2002. This was new stuff. The combination of those two things laid a sort of a foundation for our business, where universally our suppliers really liked doing business with us. So that was a really critical time for us. And there was a couple of decisions. They weren't lucky decisions. I think they were actually, thought through decisions that we made, but they turned out to be small but really crucial things that we did.
Okay. I wanted to kind of ask your opinion about something. So I heard that something like 20 to 30% a lot of these sites, these tours and activity sites, are actually selling super shuttle or limousines. And then I heard that another big chunk of them are selling hop-on, hop-off buses and Segway tours. And this was said to me by someone telling me why all of these kind of one was viable back in the day. There was about a lot of kind of these, Airbnb for tours and experiences. Now, obviously, Airbnb is now currently Airbnb for tours and experiences, but there were a lot of people who tried to kind of diversify. And I was told that reason why a lot of them failed was because people misunderstood what people did in destination. It was usually the people from Dallas, like you said, going to Australia and hopping on the hop-off bus. It wasn't the person looking for a graffiti tour. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about your market discovery process. How did you guys, realize what to settle on, and how have you viewed other companies as having maybe missed the point of like where the big tours and activities chunk of business is?
Yeah, this is it's an interesting topic, or at least the way I understand you to ask the question. It's an interesting topic. We always, we loved finding new and interesting products. The example that I would use would be the Chocolate Lovers Walking Tour of Paris. It's a really good tour. I've done it, and it's really cool. And we had this theory that, we're going to prosper because we're going to have all of these cool things that we've discovered that are sort of on the edges there, like the graffiti tour of Barcelona, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to drive our business forward. And in a way they did. The fact that we had those things was important, but I can tell you that when people go to Paris, they don't do the Chocolate Lovers Walking Tour. They do the hop-on, hop-off bus. They do the Eiffel Tower. They do the Louvre and Versailles, etc. There's a small core of products that they do. It always amuses me because I still hear it now about, tech is going to use AI and pattern matching and some other cool stuff to figure out exactly the right things for a particular customer to do when they visit Barcelona. I can tell you what they're going to do when they visit Barcelona. I already know what they're going to do. Everybody does a certain set of things. They do this, when they come to Sydney, they do the bridge climb, etc. There's just there's no need for all that cool tech. Once you've got those core products, the other things are like icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Did I really answer your question then, or
yeah.
did I just go off on my own tangent?
No, I mean, we encourage tangents here. But no, that's exactly kind of part of what I was getting at, is that I feel like very often in the travel industry, people build a product they want as opposed to listening to the market and what the market needs. And we all like to think of ourselves as not average, normal, doing the Segway tour or what everyone else is doing. But I think I found this a lot with a lot of different companies that start in the travel industry. They kind of end up, just fantasizing and going off of, their one experience backpacking around Europe, not, listening to what the normal person is going to do. So no, I think you answered it specifically. I wanted to kind of move on here before we run out of time a little bit towards you have ended up transitioning away. And there was a long period between until you got an exit. And I think this is something I'm hearing a lot from travel industry entrepreneurs. I know a lot of friends who are looking to exit in the next 6 to 12 months. Those people that might have bought them are now either borderline bankrupt or definitely don't have the cash to outlay. And Viator's actually come up a couple of times as like, yeah, those guys waited like 20 years for an exit and were really early. And I'd love to just understand that you at some point stepped down and you ended up joining Rome to Rio. And I forget the exact timing of that, if you joined Rome to Rio before Viator was even sold, but you moved on at some point. How did you psychologically make that jump, and what was your thinking at the time?
Well, I mean, others helped me. I think it is absolutely the case that businesses go through stages where certain types of founders do well, and then they may enter a stage. To be specific, some people are risk averse. I'm not risk averse at all. I'm happy with risk. I'm happy with taking some chances and getting something started and seeing what happens. But then when the business becomes bigger and there's a couple of hundred staff and you've got maybe $15 million or $50 million of investors' funds at work, that same attitude that you would use to get things started is not quite so applicable. And that's what I came to realize. And certainly my board of directors helped me realize that I wasn't the right person. We very fortunately, when we funded the business with Carlyle in 2005, we had hired a woman called Barry Seidenberg. She was a Stanford MBA who had worked for Preview Travel, and she was exactly the right person to take the company forward as CEO. So I didn't mind that. It all worked out really well for me. Just one of those things you got to do.
But just on that, Rod, I mean, it's your and Peter's baby. It's almost like you weren't there to see it move on to its new adopted parents. Was that difficult to do, or were you quite happy with leaving it to Barry to dot the I's and cross the T's and you end up okay anyway?
Oh yeah. I would never have been able to get it. I think we were doing, $40 or $50 million annual revenue in 2010 when I left, and it was 4 times that. And I would not have been the right person to take the company on that part of the journey. That's a very spreadsheet-driven part of the journey, and I'm not a spreadsheet guy at all.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little future looking here in our last few minutes. Hate to set you on your favorite subject of Google and everything, but there was, there's a lot that's going to change in the travel industry. You just mentioned 9/11, about how, despite the human tragedy, it was actually good for the travel industry, or the online travel industry specifically. I'm curious, what are you seeing, going forward for us now?
Well, I just wonder how valuable anybody's insights are at all. We're in such a space of not knowing when this is going to end, and I think one of the key determinants of how it looks after it's all over is how long the lockdown lasts. I mean, if we were able to all get everything started again this year, then we may just have a 6 to 12 month period where there's a bit of a shakeout, and then things get back to normal after that. But if we have a bunch of second wave infections or whatever we call them, a big second wave and a third wave and a fourth wave, and countries open up and then shut back down again, and we're in this tunnel for 2 or 3 years, then it's a different kettle of fish altogether. So whilst I appreciate your question, David, I don't think prognosticating about the future. I think we're just on shaky ground trying to do that right now.
Just last one from me, really, Rod. I mean, you and I go back a long time, and we've crossed swords and been on panels, and I've interviewed you many times over the years. Maybe I've just never been making excellent notes or remembered, but I never quite heard you say how lucky you say you've been over the years. I wonder whether that's something that you've decided you've been lucky as the years have advanced and you've gone through the entrepreneur phase and you've gone through another couple of businesses. Now that you consider yourself lucky. And second of all, I mean, what other kind of lucky moments would you identify to, so that you can categorize yourself as being a lucky person or a lucky entrepreneur?
No, I think I've always, all the way along, I believe two things. My sort of personal motto in life is that anything can happen and often does. So I'm prepared for anything. I'm not going to be surprised. So let me give you another example of how I think we were incredibly lucky. We were raising money in 2005 and we didn't have a lot of money left. We needed to raise funds. Our Australian investors had been very patient and they'd followed on a couple of times, but they were sort of tapped out. We needed a US investor to come in with $10 million, which at the time was a fair bit of money. We saw, Barry and I probably saw 25 or 30 venture capital firms, and it was always the same. They liked it, but travel, tours and activities, not a thing. So we were literally down to the last name on our list, which was a company called Carlyle Ventures, and Carlyle didn't even really have a venture fund. They're a private equity firm that usually does like oil and armaments and all sorts of other stuff, much bigger than what we were looking for. But we took a meeting with this dude in San Francisco, and the meeting went just like almost all of the 25 meetings before that. And at the end, he said, yeah, great. I'm going to talk to my partners and I'll come back to you, which I knew at that stage meant I'm not coming back to you. Or if I do, it'll be to say, we're not going ahead with this. So we got up to leave and I picked up this dude's card and I looked at his name, and his name, Alan Tiggerson. He's at Google now. And I saw it was I thought this is a Danish name. And I said to him, are you Danish? And he said, yeah, why? And I said, man, sit down. We're almost related. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, Mary Donaldson. Mary Donaldson, who is that? And I said, she's going to be the next Queen of Denmark. The backstory is that I'm from Tasmania, and a Tasmanian girl had fallen in love with and married Prince Edward of Denmark a few years earlier. She had met him at the Olympic Games in Sydney by chance at a bar, and I knew the whole story. And this guy, this Carlyle investor, Alan, like most Danes, was a monarchist at heart and really wanted to know the story, but was starved for the details because in America he just wasn't he wasn't seeing the Danish press. So he sat down, he said, tell me everything. And we spoke for another 30 or 40 minutes. And we developed a rapport right there around the subject of the heir to the Danish throne, a commoner from Tasmania, just like me, another commoner from Tasmania. And at the end of the meeting, he said, this was fun. This was fun. I'm going to talk to my partners and maybe we'll see you again. And he did, and we did, and they invested, I think, 11, 15, something like that, $1 million, and it all worked out. That was really lucky.
So the moral of the story is to come up with a backstory that you can kind of woo your investors in. There's absolutely nothing to do with the business and maybe to do with their hometown or their home country, really. That's it, right?
Look, I think in 99 cases out of 100, it just wouldn't have been relevant. It was just there, It was like, oh my God, you're from Denmark and I'm from Tasmania. What a weird connection this is. It was just a thing.
David.
Yeah, well, I think our time's up. So, thanks a lot, Rod. I think this is been a great interview to kick us off for our season 2. So to recap for everyone listening, this is How I Got Here, Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly podcast about the future of transportation and travel. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Rod.
David and Kevin, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more insight stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages, and get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.